Picture this. You are standing in a Roman villa courtyard in 50 AD, watching as a wealthy landowner checks a 14-year-old slave girl like she is prized livestock. He checks her teeth for health, measures her hips for childbearing, then opens a leather book and writes down her estimated breeding value, 12,000 sesterces, over 20 years if she produces 8 healthy children. This is not a livestock auction. This is human breeding, and the Romans turned it into a science. What I am about to show you will destroy everything you thought you knew about Roman civilization. Because while Rome gave us law and writing, they also perfected the most organized human breeding program in ancient history. They kept detailed records, wrote instruction manuals, and calculated human reproduction with the same care they used for cattle farming. And they wrote down every horrifying detail. Marcus Crassus did not become Rome's richest man through war alone. His true fortune came from breeding human beings like cattle, and archaeologists found his villa records in These ledgers read like livestock breeding guides, except the stock being discussed were enslaved women and children. A healthy 16-year-old woman cost 2,000 sesterces, but Crassus calculated she could produce 8 to 10 children worth 1,500 sesterces each. That is 12,000 to 15,000 sesterces profit over 20 years. Pure mathematical breeding. The ledgers track monthly cycles, pregnancy results, and child death rates with cold precision. Women who failed to get pregnant within their first year were sold at lower prices. One entry describes buying a Greek woman specifically because her past owner promised her great fertility and the quality of her children. But the true horror lies in the breeding pairing. Like a dog breeder selecting for traits, Crassus matched male and female slaves based on physical characteristics he wanted to reproduce. Tall, strong men were paired with women from regions known for producing skilled artisans. Beautiful women were matched with intelligent men to create slaves suitable for household service. Archaeological analysis of the villa slave quarters reveals separate housing areas for pregnant women, with larger chambers designed to accommodate mothers with multiple small children. The layout was not for comfort, it was to maximize reproductive efficiency, while minimizing the risk of losing valuable breeding stock to disease. Modern forensic analysis of skeletal remains from Roman slave cemeteries confirms this horror. Female slaves show evidence of repeated pregnancies starting as early as age 13 or 14, with pelvic deformations suggesting childbirth complications that would be medical emergencies today, but were simply accepted costs of the breeding business. The Romans did not just practice human breeding, they wrote instruction manuals for it. Marcus Terentius Varro's agricultural text from 37 BCE includes a section on managing slave reproduction with the same scientific methodology he applied to sheep and cattle breeding. These texts, preserved in medieval monasteries, provide detailed instructions that read like a nightmare fusion of ancient agriculture and human trafficking. Varro recommended purchasing female slaves between ages 12 and 16 for optimal reproductive potential, noting that younger girls required more initial investment before reaching productive capacity. He calculated that the ideal age for first pregnancy was 15, as this provided the maximum number of reproductive years, while minimizing maternal death that would represent total loss of investment. The text includes specific dietary recommendations for pregnant slaves, but these were not based on maternal health concerns. They were designed to produce the strongest possible offspring. Pregnant women received additional grain and occasional meat, not out of compassion, but because malnourished mothers produced weaker children who commanded lower market prices. Varro advised separating the strongest male slaves for breeding purposes, housing them apart from the general population to prevent uncontrolled mating that might produce inferior offspring. These men, called stallions in the villa records, were rewarded with better food and housing in exchange for their reproductive services. The manual includes detailed instructions for managing slave families to maximize breeding efficiency. Children were separated from their mothers at age 5 or 6 to begin specialized training, but also to free up the mothers for additional pregnancies. Varro calculated that keeping children with their mothers beyond this age represented lost reproductive opportunity. Most disturbing are the sections on culling unproductive breeding stock. Varro recommended selling women who failed to conceive after 2 years of breeding attempts, as their continued maintenance costs exceeded their potential value. Men who produced consistently weak children were to be eliminated from breeding programs and assigned to dangerous work where their deaths would represent minimal economic loss. But systematic breeding required more than forced reproduction. It demanded breaking the human spirit to ensure compliance across generations. The process began the moment a young woman arrived at a villa. New female slaves underwent what Roman sources called the domestication period, typically lasting 6 months to a year. During this time, they were subjected to systematic psychological conditioning designed to eliminate any thoughts of resistance or escape. Physical isolation was the first step. New arrivals were separated from other slaves and housed in individual cells where they had no contact with anyone except their designated trainer, usually an older female slave who had successfully adapted to the system. This isolation continued until the young woman showed clear signs of psychological dependency on her captor. The training included explicit instruction in sexual submission techniques, designed to prepare young women for breeding purposes. Roman medical texts describe procedures that were essentially systematic rape disguised as medical examinations, conducted to assess reproductive capacity while simultaneously breaking down psychological resistance. Dietary manipulation played a crucial role. New slaves received barely adequate nutrition for the first several months, creating physical weakness that made resistance impossible. Food was used as reward for compliance and withheld as punishment for defiance. This created powerful conditioning that linked survival to absolute obedience. The most effective technique was deliberate destruction of cultural and family identity. New slaves were forced to abandon their original names, languages, and religious practices. They were given Roman names and required to speak only Latin, with severe punishment for any use of their native languages. Family separation was systematic and intentional. Women who arrived with children had them immediately taken away and assigned to different parts of the villa or sold to other owners. This eliminated distractions that might interfere with breeding duties, created devastating emotional trauma that broke resistance, and provided leverage for ensuring continued compliance through threats against the children. The documentation reveals that successful breaking was measured by specific behavioral markers. A fully conditioned slave woman would demonstrate complete sexual compliance, show no emotional attachment to her offspring beyond basic care, and actively assist in training new arrivals. Women who achieved this level of psychological destruction were considered premium breeding stock. The most sophisticated aspect of Roman human breeding was the Vernae system. Slaves born and raised in captivity who never knew freedom. These houseborn slaves represented the ultimate achievement of Roman breeding programs, producing human beings specifically designed for lifelong servitude. Vernae were considered superior to purchased slaves because they had no memory of freedom to corrupt their compliance. Roman agricultural writers recommended that at least 80% of a villa's slave population should consist of Vernae, as they represented better long-term investments than captured adults who retained dangerous memories of independence. The system began with carefully planned pregnancies timed to maximize efficiency. Breeding schedules were coordinated so that multiple women gave birth during the same season, allowing for more efficient management of child care and early training. Spring births were preferred because children could be weaned during harvest season, when milk from slave mothers was less crucial. Newborn Vernae slave children born in the household underwent immediate evaluation processes that determined their entire future. Physical examinations within days of birth identified potential disabilities or defects that might affect their value. Healthy children were marked with brands or tattoos indicating their birth year, parentage, and intended specialization. Those with apparent defects were often killed immediately to avoid wasting resources. Early childhood was carefully managed to produce specific psychological traits. Children were separated from their biological mothers within months of weaning, and raised in group nurseries by older female slaves specifically trained in producing compliant personality. This prevented the formation of strong family bonds that might interfere with absolute loyalty to their owners. Educational programs for Vernae were designed to produce specialized skills while eliminating any capacity for independent thinking. Children who showed aptitude for specific trades, received advanced training in those skills along with intensive conditioning to view their abilities as gifts from their owners, rather than personal talents. The most valuable vernae were those selected for administrative positions requiring intelligence and judgment. These children received education comparable to free Roman youth, including literacy, mathematics, and philosophy, but always within the framework that their intelligence existed solely to benefit their owners. Sexual conditioning began early for vernae, intended for breeding purposes. Both male and female children received explicit instruction in reproductive techniques designed to maximize fertility and minimize emotional attachment to sexual partners or offspring. This training was presented as a natural and necessary part of their fundamental purpose as human livestock. Roman slave markets transformed human breeding from private villa operations into public entertainment, with elaborate auction procedures designed to showcase reproductive potential while providing buyers with detailed information about their human livestock investments. Slave auctions followed standardized procedures familiar to anyone who has observed livestock sales. Potential breeding stock was separated from general labor slaves and subjected to detailed physical examinations conducted in full view of prospective buyers. These inspections included invasive procedures designed to verify virginity, assess reproductive capacity, and identify any defects that might affect breeding value. Young women intended for breeding purposes underwent the most thorough examination. Buyers inspected teeth, examined breasts for signs of development, and conducted internal examinations to assess reproductive organs. Auctioneers provided detailed information about menstrual history, previous pregnancies, and family medical background. Women who had already produced healthy children commanded premium prices as proven breeding stock. The auction process included performance demonstrations where slave women were required to display their physical capabilities, domestic skills, and sexual compliance. These demonstrations were conducted publicly, with crowds of buyers and spectators observing as human beings were forced to prove their worthiness for purchase. Male breeding slaves underwent similar examinations focused on physical strength, genetic traits, and proven fertility. Men who had fathered multiple healthy children were marketed as premium breeding stock with detailed records of their offspring's characteristics and market value. Children born to slave parents were often sold at the same auctions, providing buyers with examples of the genetic traits they could expect from breeding purchases. These family sales were deliberately designed to demonstrate breeding potential while creating additional trauma through family separation. Roman medicine developed an entire specialty around managing slave reproduction, producing medical texts that read like veterinary manuals applied to human breeding stock. The Roman physician Soranus of Ephesus wrote extensively on slave gynecology, describing procedures designed to assess reproductive capacity and ensure the survival of valuable offspring. Fertility testing procedures developed specifically for slave women were invasive and brutal by modern standards, but were considered routine medical care by Roman physicians. These examinations included internal inspections to assess reproductive organs, forced menstrual tracking to identify optimal breeding times, and experimental treatments to increase fertility rate. Roman medical texts describe systematic approaches to managing slave pregnancies that prioritized offspring's survival over maternal health. Pregnant slaves received specialized diets calculated to produce larger, stronger children regardless of the physical toll on the mother. Medical interventions during difficult births focused on saving valuable babies even when this required procedures that would likely kill the mothers. Caesarean sections were performed on slave women centuries before they became common procedures for free women, but not to save maternal lives. Roman physicians developed these techniques specifically to recover valuable babies from dying slave mothers, with no expectation that the mothers would survive the procedure. The most devastating challenge to Roman breeding programs came from the enslaved people themselves. The Third Servile War, led by Spartacus from 73 to 71 BCE, began as a gladiator revolt but evolved into a systematic assault on the entire foundation of Roman slavery, including the breeding programs. Spartacus understood that military victory alone would be insufficient. His strategic genius lay in recognizing that breeding programs represented the long-term sustainability of Roman slave society. If these could be disrupted permanently, the entire economic foundation of the empire would collapse within a generation. The rebel strategy included systematic liberation of breeding facilities throughout southern Italy. When Spartacus's forces captured a villa, they did not just free existing slaves. They destroyed the infrastructure of human breeding. Breeding records were burned, specialized facilities were demolished, and breeding stock was integrated into the general population to prevent future reproductive exploitation. Archaeological evidence from villas sacked during the Spartacus Revolt shows the thoroughness of these operations. Excavations revealed deliberate destruction of nursery facilities, breeding chambers, and medical equipment used for managing slave reproduction. The rebels understood exactly what they were targeting and systematically eliminated the physical foundations of human breeding program. Roman response reveals how central breeding programs were to the empire's survival. Marcus Licinius Crassus, tasked with suppressing the revolt, prioritized recapturing breeding facilities over recovering general agricultural operations. His military dispatches show that protecting reproductive infrastructure was considered essential to Roman national security. The rebellion's failure resulted in savage reprisals specifically designed to terrorize anyone who might consider disrupting breeding programs. The famous crucifixions along the Appian Way included disproportionate numbers of women who had participated in liberating breeding facilities. Modern archaeological techniques have uncovered disturbing physical evidence that confirms the documentary sources. Excavations at villa sites throughout the former Roman Empire reveal architectural features, artifact collections, and human remains that paint a detailed picture of systematic human breeding operation. Ground-penetrating radar surveys at sites like Pompeii have identified specialized building complexes, clearly designed for managing human reproduction. These structures include segregated housing for pregnant women, nursery facilities with sophisticated heating systems, and medical rooms equipped with gynecological instruments found nowhere else in Roman domestic architecture. The villa of Quintus Hortensius near Tusculum provides the most complete archaeological evidence of a Roman breeding operation. The site includes separate quarters for breeding males, a maternity complex with individual birthing rooms, and a nursery facility designed to house over 100 infants simultaneously. Forensic analysis of skeletal remains from Roman slave cemeteries reveals the physical toll on enslaved women. Female skeletons from villa sites show evidence of repeated pregnancies starting as early as age 13 to 14, with pelvic deformations indicating difficult births and high maternal mortality rates. The most disturbing discoveries come from infant burial sites associated with Roman villas. Archaeological excavations have uncovered mass graves containing hundreds of infant remains, with forensic analysis suggesting these were children who died during the first months of life. The systematic nature of these burials indicates that high infant mortality was an expected aspect of breeding operations. The systematic human breeding programs of ancient Rome established patterns of exploitation that would echo through centuries of human slavery, influencing the development of plantation systems, colonial policies, and modern forms of human trafficking. The techniques, justifications, and economic calculations pioneered by Roman villa owners provided blueprints for later forms of reproductive exploitation. The Spanish and Portuguese colonial systems in the Americas borrowed extensively from Roman breeding precedents, including the concept of treating enslaved people as renewable resources through controlled reproduction. Colonial documents from the 16th and 17th centuries include explicit references to Roman agricultural texts as guides for managing slave populations in New World plantations. The psychological techniques developed to break resistance and ensure compliance with breeding programs were transmitted through centuries of slavery practice. The systematic destruction of family bonds, cultural identity, and personal autonomy that characterized Roman Vernay production became standard procedures in plantation systems throughout the Americas. Modern forms of human trafficking, particularly sex trafficking, employ psychological control techniques that trace directly back to Roman methods for conditioning breeding stock. The isolation, dependency creation, and identity destruction used by contemporary traffickers follow patterns established by Roman slave owners over 2 millennia ago. The twisted breeding programs of ancient Rome represent more than historical curiosity. They reveal the systematic methodology by which civilized societies can reduce human beings to economic commodities, while maintaining elaborate justifications for unconscionable exploitation. For over 5 centuries, the Roman Empire perfected techniques for treating human reproduction as agricultural science. The archaeological evidence continues to reveal new horrors as modern techniques uncover the physical infrastructure of systematic human breeding. Every excavation brings new discoveries that force us to confront the reality that one of history's most celebrated civilizations built its prosperity through methods that modern society would classify as crimes against humanity. The documentary evidence preserved in Roman texts reveals how easily intellectual sophistication can be applied to moral horror. The same minds that produced philosophical treatises on virtue and justice also wrote clinical manuals for human breeding that display no recognition of the humanity of their subject. Understanding the reality of Roman breeding programs provides essential context for recognizing similar patterns in contemporary forms of exploitation. The same psychological techniques, economic calculations, and social justifications that enabled systematic human breeding in ancient Rome continue to operate in modern systems of trafficking, forced labor, and reproductive coercion. The twisted legacy reminds us that civilizational achievement means nothing if it is built on the systematic dehumanization of vulnerable populations. True progress requires not just technological advancement or cultural sophistication, but moral recognition of the inherent dignity and autonomy of every human being. And if this glimpse into history's hidden darkness has left you wanting more, click on the video appearing on your screen now to discover another shocking chapter that history tried to erase. If you found this exploration as compelling as I did, hit that subscribe button so we can keep peeling back the layers together. These forgotten voices deserve to be heard.